taking the discussion ahead, now we would be talking about market for loanable funds. Now we understand that savings is calculated like, or savings is calculated by investments plus net capital outflow. So it can be called as domestic investment plus net capital outflow. Now when we are talking about savings, here the savings side or the left side is indicating the supply of loanable funds, whereas this portion indicates, that is domestic investment plus net capital outflow together indicate the demand of loanable funds. Now loanable funds are domestically generated flow of resources, so they are domestically generated flow of resources when net capital outflow is greater than 0, there is a net capital outflow. On the other hand, when net capital outflow is less than 0, there is a net capital inflow. Now taking this into account, the quantity of loanable funds supplied and the quantity of loanable fund demanded is dependent on the interest rate. So let's write it down. Quantity of loanable funds available and the quantity of loanable funds demanded, both of them are dependent on interest rates. Now why is this so? Because a higher interest rate would motivate the people to save more. So let's assume that here the interest rates were, let's say, 5%, and at that moment people were saving 1000 rupees. Now if it has become 8%, then people might become would be motivated to save a higher amount. So a higher real interest rate, would motivate the people to save more, because with less risk they will be able to get more returns. Now when they save more, loanable fund increases, and due to that what happens is ज़्यादा लोन्स देने के लिए बैंक्स के पास पैसे होंगे. On the other hand, when higher interest rates are there, so the investments reduce. Okay, investments reduce हो जाएंगे because borrowing becomes costly. And when borrowing becomes costly, here the demand for money reduces. Okay, demand for money reduces. As a result, what happens? There will be excess amount of money in the economy. So the interest rates would come down because of this reason. Okay, if the interest rates, let's say, are below equilibrium, the quantity of loanable funds would be less than the quantity demanded. So if, let's say, this is the demand for money and this is the supply for money, and here we are able to determine the rate of interest. So here it is x-axis and this is quantity of money and this is your interest rates. Here this is the demand for money and this is the supply for money. Here we have determined the interest rates at R1, and at R1 Q1 quantity is getting supplied. Now let's say what happens is that the quantity of money demanded, okay, or I set the rate of interest at a level less than equilibrium level, okay. Here I am setting the interest rates at R0, okay. Then what happens, the quantity demanded would be increased because the quantity demanded would be increased. Why? Because here I am able to supply more, okay. I am able to get more loans, or the loans taking becomes cheaper, and at this stage here the supply curve is interacting with this line. So because I am not getting adequate amount of returns against the loans that I am giving, I would reduce the supply, or the supply of money gets reduced in the market. Another scenario, if I increase the rate of interest to R2, here R2 interest rate, the quantity would be this, that is, let's assume it is Q3, okay. So the quantity supplied would be higher. Why? Because here I would be able to get more interest rate, and the quantity demanded would be lower than that at Q4. Why? Because here I don't find it much more feasible to take loans, okay. I don't find it feasible to take loans in this case, because here I have to pay more for the money that I am borrowing, okay. So what happens in this case, when R1 से R2 तक interest rates बढ़ते हैं, ROI becomes from R1 to R2. What happens in this case is that the supply would be equal to Q3 and the demand would be equal to Q4, that is, the demand would be less. On the other hand, if ROI shifts from R1 to R0, then the supply would be Q3 dash, here let's make it Q3 dash, here the supply would be Q3 dash in case of earlier, here the supply is Q3 and the demand would be Q2, okay. So more money would be demanded when ROI reduces, that is, rate of interest reduces, and less money would be demanded when rate of interest increases. On the other hand, more money would be supplied when rate of interest increases, and less money would be supplied when rate of interest decreases. So similarly, let's see as to how it affects the supply of loanable funds in another scenario, okay. So let's, now we know is that S is equal to I plus net capital outflows, okay, and net capital outflow is equal to net exports, okay. Now here net capital outflow depends on interest rates in the way that interest rates when they are higher, domestic assets become much more attractive in this case. Now, why this happens is because let's assume that the real interest rate is this much, okay. Let's draw a figure here. Y, on the y-axis we have real interest rate, on the x-axis we have capital outflows, net capital outflows. On the x-axis here this is the demand curve, okay, this is the TD curve, and if the interest rates is this and this, we are taking two scenarios. Here the interest rate is this one and this one, so interest rate R1 and R2, and in this case Q2 and Q1, okay. So let's assume that the interest rate earlier the interest rate was R1 and now it has gone up to R2. Because of that, the quantity which is demanded, or the net capital outflow which was earlier Q1 at the moment, at the earlier times when the interest rate was R1, it was Q1. Now it has reduced, that is capital outflow has reduced to Q2. Now why the capital outflow has reduced? Because people find it better to invest in their own country. Due to this, what happens is that the capital outflow reduces, and due to this the scenario comes as कि लोग अपने ही कंट्री में इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए ज़्यादा प्रेफर करेंगे rather than going out to the other country. Now, if the reverse scenario is there, that is, if the interest rate was R1 and it goes down to R2, here people would be investing more in the other countries. Okay, there would be a capital outflow in that case. So in this manner, the capital outflows are getting influenced, or the market for loanable funds is influenced by the savings and investments in this manner.